Hello, and welcome to the Parentless Daughter Podcast. My name is Lauren, or Lo, or if you know me from TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook, Flabulous Lo. So if you've gathered from the name, the Parentless Daughter, I am a parentless daughter. Now, I wasn't always a parentless daughter. I did have two incredible parents, and this podcast and the next, I'll talk about my parents. This one I'll focus on my mom because, well, she was the first one to pass away, and her passing was a great length of my childhood, and we will dive into what that means. The next podcast, I'll talk about my dad, who was my sole parent from the age of 8. Both of my parents' deaths were polar opposites, and I grieved very differently for both, even though they're both parents. But they were two very different experiences and two different people. So let's start with my mom. A little into who she was. Her name was Debbie, or Deb, and she truly was the life of the party. My parents met in 86, so they were about 30 and 29 years old. So at that time, I guess that's a little bit later to be married, and they didn't have me until 1992. So they were considered older parents at that time, not so much anymore, but at that time, they struggled a lot to have children. They had miscarriages, and then, of course, me, their golden little egg. I was the daughter my mother always dreamed of. If you ask anyone who knew her, they would say the exact same thing, that my mother spoiled me with love, with things, with just anything you could think of. She loved me more than anything on this earth and more than anything she could have ever dreamed of. And for that, I am forever grateful. Now, my mom was the most hands-on mom, shocker with what I had just said, but the most hands-on mom. She was a nurse at Sick Kids Hospital, so incredible with children. Both of my parents were the most social, outgoing people. We always had people at our house for parties, for dinners. Just our home, our door was an open door policy. So my mom had, just like my dad, friends everywhere. We always had people over. We always were throwing Christmas parties, Thanksgiving, Easter, birthday parties, you name it, we had it. So I think I've shed some light on who my mom was. Now, of course, there's lots of little details within who she was and what she was like. But to be quite honest, for me, it's very hard to remember many details because I was 8 when she got sick. So let's jump forward to when I was 8. We had just had March break and just come back from Cuba, and I was headed back to school. My mom was driving me to daycare. My daycare was at school, so she dropped me off, and from what I have been told, because I wasn't there for this, she went back to her car and started to feel unwell. She called my dad, and he called my daycare, and they called an ambulance, and she had had a brain aneurysm. They rushed her to the hospital where she actually died. She died on scene, and they brought her back to life. Now, mind you, I was 8 years old. I still to this day, because I was so young, don't really even know what exactly happened. I have been told many things, but I was so young and I can still only see it from my perspective. And that is of an 8-year-old. So I stayed at a friend's place for a few nights. My best friend at the time, who lived down the street, shout out to Madeline. And my dad and my grandma, my mom's mom, were at the hospital basically the entire time with my mom. And from what I remember, a few days after, I went down to the office and said that I didn't feel well. So my dad and my grandma picked me up, and in the car, they proceeded to tell me that something happened to my mom and we were going to go see her. From what I remember, we go to the hospital to see her. Mind you, she had just had a brain aneurysm, so she had brain surgery. Her head was wrapped because she had brain surgery, and as an 8-year-old, I was rather scared. She did not look like her, and this was not the mom I knew laying there in that bed. From what I remember, they brought me to her and I was standing beside her. They told me I can, grab her hand. Everything's okay. So I did. And they told me I could speak to her. She could hear me, but she wouldn't be able to speak back. She wasn't awake. She was in a coma. So all I remember from that is just crying to her and saying, "Mommy, please don't go. I need you." And that's all I remember from that visit. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember saying anything else. That's also the only visit I actually truly remember from when she was in a coma. My mom, from what I remember, was in the hospital for about a year, and then she came home and lived with us. Now, again, my time frame, very dicey. I was very young and this was very traumatic. I remember her living with us for a little bit, but I don't know how long. When she did live with us, she became an alcoholic. A lot of it had to do with the fact that her brain couldn't tell her when enough was enough. It wasn't because she was depressed or because she was one before. It was literally because her brain had no sense of right and wrong, no sense of stop because of that brain injury. Living with that, mind you, at this time, I'm around 10 or about to be 10. Living with that was extremely difficult. My dad wasn't the greatest with processing emotions and being there emotionally, that a lot of the time I was left alone with her and she would be so drunk that I would have to pick her up off the floor. One vivid memory that I have from childhood that has scarred me for life, to be honest, is I was probably about 10. She was walking up our staircase, and our staircase had this little curve to it, and she was drunk, mind you. This was someone who couldn't walk properly, was paralyzed on one side of her body, and struggled to walk properly, on top of being drunk. So keep this in mind. She proceeds to walk up the stairs and is a few steps up and falls straight back, smacks her head on the ground, blood everywhere. And I was standing near the bottom of the stairs, so I saw this whole scenario unfold. This had happened another time when we were out in public. These moments were just super traumatic. My dad decided my mom needed to move out for my safety. So she had her own place, but of course, alcoholic who has mobility issues, not the best to live on their own. So I don't think that lasted long. I don't know how long it lasted, but not long. After that, she moved into a care home type place for people with brain injuries. Her floor was specific to that, and she lived there until she passed away, and it was the perfect fit for her because she had round-the-clock supervision. She had other people there who were going through something similar. She would come visit every Sunday when I was about 11 to 16, I would say. And to be quite honest, I despised these visits because she just drank the whole time, and I didn't want to be around that. So needless to say, between the ages of 8 and 20, my mom and I had a very different relationship. She wasn't really a mother figure between those ages, to be quite honest. Fast forward to when I was 20 and we got a phone call saying my mom wasn't doing so well. So my dad and I went to go see her, and she was in and out, more so out, not really responsive. And I remember grabbing her hand and telling her it was okay if she left, that I would be okay, that she stayed 12 years for me and it was okay. When we were leaving, the doctor said she probably has a week or two. And so we went to my dad's car, got in the car. This was one of the few times I ever saw my dad cry, and he grabbed my hand and told me it really is just us now. Because it had always just been him and I since I was 8. And I remember looking over and just seeing tears streaming down his face. And in that moment, I truly knew that she wasn't going to make it and that it was just going to be him and I. That night, we ended up getting a call that she passed away. And I just remember physically feeling my heart break hearing those words. Whenever I talk about my mom passing, I always say I lost her twice. I lost my mom, the one who I consider my mom, when I was 8. She was gone. but I lost her physical self when I was 20. Because between the ages of 8 and 20, she was not the same person. She wasn't her. Losing her at 20, her physical body at 20, reopened a lot of wounds that I had from age 8. Because at 8, you're too young to understand. I went through grief at age 8, losing my mom, who she was, losing a mom. Because after age 8, I really didn't have a mom anymore. Sure, my mom was alive and her physical body was there, but she wasn't my mom. So I have been grieving my mom since I was 8. But at age 8, I didn't have the words and I didn't have the tools and I just didn't have the support system around me to really understand what I was going through. When I was 20, I was in school and I had taken a few weeks off and then went right back to school, went back to trying to live my everyday life, and it kind of worked. I mean, I pushed it all down. I had been grieving for 12 years alone anyways, it felt. So going back to this so-and-so normal life just felt right. But as we all know, grief comes in many forms and in many waves. And when I turned about 24, it really hit me. And that's why I started going to therapy. And since losing my dad, I have been grieving my mom more than I ever did. More than when I was 8, more than when I was 20, more than when I was 24. I am feeling it so hard since losing my dad. Because when my mom died, I had my dad there. But when my dad died, I don't have my mom here and all I want is her. The complexity of grief can be so layered. And this is something we'll talk about continuously throughout the podcast, the complexity of grief, because it is layered. It is so layered. And I never knew that until my dad died. It swept me off my feet. And it is still to this day catching me when I least expect it. Growing up without a mom always made me feel so isolated. Even though my mom was still alive, it was extremely hard to go through puberty and my teenage years not having her there with me and not having a motherly figure to look at. It was also extremely hard when I was in my early 20s to not have a mom, as well as my 30s now. And when I think of the future, not having her there when I get married, when I have kids, that is a part of grief I struggle with a lot. And we will dive more into that in another podcast, is grieving the future and how that feels and what that looks like. Every time I talk about my mom and I mention this in-between stage of who she was, people typically think negatively about her. And for a long time, I did too. And I hated who she was. That wasn't my mom, and I never understood why she couldn't stop drinking for me. I thought that if she couldn't stop, then that meant she didn't love me enough. But that wasn't the case. She was sick. And in my adult brain now, I understand that it wasn't her fault. And this is one of my favorite sayings, which you will probably hear a lot, is that two can be true. My mom was dealt a rough hand, and she wasn't herself. That was not her. It was not her fault. She didn't ask to have an aneurysm. She couldn't control that. She couldn't control what the aftermath effects were, and I don't blame her. But this is where the two can be true comes in. Little me did not deserve that. I deserved to have a mom who was present and who wasn't falling down drunk. I deserved to feel safe and loved. I deserved that. And I didn't get that. And my anger as a teen and young adult was justified and valid. At the same time, I hold space that it was not my mom's fault. So again, two can be true. I love my mom. I love her more than anything. I miss her more than anything. She was the most incredible person. And I think if she was still here today, pre-age 8, you would all be obsessed with her too. She was a girl's girl, the mom of everyone. And she was my number one fan. And I think she would love what I'm doing right now. And sharing this story, this very layered, big part of grief, is so important because there's so many layers to it. There's so many different components of grief. It wasn't just my mom dying that was the grief. That is like surface level grief. It's everything underneath. And the more we continue to talk throughout these podcasts, the more we'll get into all of that. Because again, grief is so layered. And we could be here all day talking about every single layer. And every death has different layers. But yeah, that's Debbie. That's her. I like to think of her before the aneurysm. I don't love pictures or memories of her post aneurysm because to me that's not my mom. That's not who I grieve. If I'm being quite honest, I don't miss the person she was between the ages of 8 and 20. I don't miss her. I don't grieve for that person. I grieve for my mom that I lost at 8. That's my mom and that's who I grieve. But that is her. I've gotten a lot of questions on Instagram and Facebook about my mom and about how she died and who she was. And I could go on for hours because, of course, there's a million different stories within this very big story of her and who she was. But we just do not have the time for every story, every fact. But I hope this gave you a general idea of who she was and what I went through as a child. Don't get me wrong, as traumatic as all of it was as a child, I still had a good childhood. I still had a home with my dad who loved me. I still had experiences like traveling that many people didn't get. I had a safe home in the sense of my dad and feeling secure with him. So, yes, there was a lot of trauma and a lot of grief. If I could just hold and hug little me, I would do so for hours because I know how scared she was. But I did still have a good childhood. I hope this gave you some insight onto why I'm so passionate about grief. Not just for the loss of my dad, which I do talk about a lot on Instagram and Facebook, but the loss of my mom, that is very complex. My dad's loss, which we will get into the next podcast, isn't as layered and extensive, I guess you could say, as my mom's. And talking about my mom's, I don't typically talk about it online as often because it is so layered and there is a lot of components to it. I don't typically talk about the loss of my mom much online, mainly because it's so layered. If you have any questions about my mom or the experience I had with her, feel free to come leave them on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or whatever platform you can find me on. I will gladly talk more about my mom. It's hard to remember all the little things. I feel like I definitely missed a lot of things, but thank you for listening and for holding space for me and my mom. I'm gonna finish this off with my favorite memory of my mom, and it's a really warm one. It's my favorite thing when I think of her. I think of this. When I was really little, she used to watch the show Passions on the couch, and she would lay down and I would come squeeze in behind her, just cuddle in right behind her back and hold her arm and just lay there. It was just one of those things that I can still feel to this day. I can still feel her warmth and I can still smell her perfume and feel her sweater that she used to wear all the time. It's just my favorite memory to think of when I'm missing my mom, because it feels like a warm hug. And I hope hearing that story makes you feel like you've just received a warm hug. Thank you for listening and being here with me. Next podcast, we will talk about my dad. But this was Debbie. And if there's anything you want to share about your mom, please feel free to. And if you are missing your mom, just remember you're not alone. I'm right there with you. Thank you so much for listening to The Parentless Daughter.